Okay, so now what we're going to do is we've talked a lot about selecting your right media vehicles and what the vehicles were. Now we need to start thinking about, well, what's going to drive it? Okay, we've talked about CPM, we've talked about all those sort of different things that might come into it, but now we need to take a more detailed approach and start to understand, well, how they operate, what they do, some of the definitions, and whether we really want to decide on one over the other. So what are the strengths, what are the advantages, and what does it all mean? All right, so the first thing we start to think about is let's get some definitions in this. Next little while, we're going to start talking about what are my different marketing communications tools that I can use. We're going to have a look at, well, what are the right tools for the right audience? We're going to make sure that our chosen media ends up being within our budget, which is always important. We don't want to run out of money before the message is out there. Can end very badly. We're going to make sure that the media we choose actually enables the creative requirements that we had, so that when the message goes out, that the right vehicle can actually allow it to operate. Make sure that our reach and frequency requirements are being met, and starting to think about making sure that we make that final choice on the correct media vehicle so that we can go ahead in relative comfort and safety. All right, so let's start talking about some of the communications tools. All right, generally there are really 4 distinct categories when it comes to the different tools of communication. Okay, so we categorize them, and the first one is we start to think about above the line. Okay, so we have above the line. Okay, which is generally our media advertising. So I'll just put that there just as a guide. Okay, sort of media advertising. We start to think about below the line. Okay, when we're talking about below the line, we're talking about our non-media comms, non-media. We also start to look at whether we're having a combination, so a little bit of above, a little bit of below, okay, which is probably where a lot of people are going to end up. And what we're talking about there is that's called through the line. Which is the combination of approaches. And then we have the extra one out there, which is public relations. Okay, public relations itself. Okay, and you might have heard about that in your day-to-day sort of goings-on in business management. So what we're going to do is we'll actually have a look at what all those things are. So when we start talking about above the line, what we're starting to look at there is it's the traditional use of mass media to reach our audience. Okay, so this is really your mass media approach. It is a little bit hard to define and categorize because you're just pumping into the universe. Okay, so your message is going out there fairly widespread. You get a little bit of control on that, obviously, because you're sort of picking the time and the date and the message, but ultimately who receives that, a little bit sort of looser and hard to define. It can be really good for getting entry into an industry into a market and building the brand awareness because it's a mass message going out. Okay, so fairly broad, fairly wide, usually hits a large audience, heavily broadcast, etc. It's broad in scope, but it is very impersonal. Okay, so it's just that massive push of information out there. So that's your above the line, mass media type advertising. Okay, so that's pretty much the first one. Then we start talking about non-media communications, which is our below the line. Okay, when we start to talk about that, below the line is very good at targeting specific customers. Okay, this is where we get very targeted, and it is very personal. Obviously, above the line, massive amount of people at once, impersonal message. Below the line, we're getting a little bit more personal with exactly the people we want to talk to. Okay, so it's there to reinforce brand awareness, and ways that we might look at below the line is things like your in-store promotion. Okay, we've got a promotion in store, there's a salesperson, there's a demo, there's that really hands-on, very tailored to the person type approach, and it might also start to constitute things like emails of advertisements to existing customers or to existing people on, you might have an email distribution list of people that have expressed interest in your company, etc. So it's very targeted, it is personalised, and you are trying to really get to the nuts and bolts of the relationship with the person. Okay, so it's very direct, it's very personal. So above the line, big broadcast goes out there, heaps of people, you're not entirely sure who it goes to. A TV commercial isn't dressed, to a person that's to whom it may concern. Big picture stuff. Below the line, small picture, demos, very hands-on, very detailed approach. Okay, when we start to go to through the line, all right, more options have become available to advertisers. Really, what's driven a lot of this is, welcome to the internet, all right? So we can actually start to come up with a whole bunch of different ways we can combine the two. That above the line, they can look at an ad, then they can click the website, and we can start to generate and detail into those people. All right, so with through the line, we're going to take a multi-layered approach or a multi-layer platform that one overlays and supports the other. Right, so there are a lot of ways that we can interact with people. On pay TV, they can hit the red button for more information, whatever it is, and then you're drawing people down and tailoring them in, as opposed to a traditional TV ad where it sort of goes out there and then it's on them to follow up or not. Right, so it's an integrated approach. It's become a bit of a thing, obviously, with places like the internet, which make it a lot easier to control and track what's going on. YouTube ads, they can click through for further info, and then you're going to start harvesting. All right, even that sort of stuff, we'll bring them in for an activity. All right, and the last one there is public relations, where we're talking about an organisation or body starting to gain exposure to their audience, right? And the way they manage to do that is by creating public interest on news articles, right? It doesn't require payment. It just requires activity, a lot of activity, to generate interest in what you're doing so that other people start to generate articles or information about it, that third parties start referring it, websites, reviewers, all that sort of stuff. What you're trying to do is create interest so other people start doing your advertising for you. It evolved out of old propaganda models used during the First World War, put up posters and start the conversation. And it's often used by large organisations and businesses to persuade people to their point of view. It's my personal, I love doing public relations. It's a bit of a different space. The great part about public relations is that it doesn't cost heaps and heaps necessarily to generate quite a wide impact. However, the catch is that you don't control the message as much. Journalists print what they like. With a lot of my advertising, I tell them what to print. With public relations, I have to create the interest, but I don't really control the message as much in that regard. So I always have to think that through. All right, so that's really what we're looking at there. So all these things boil down to an AIDA model. Okay, and when we talk about AIDA, the first thing I want to do is make sure, do I have the people's attention? Regardless of which way I go, I want to gain attention, right? I want to start to bring people down and get the attention of the customer. I then want to start to create an interest for them, okay, so that they get a little bit of interest. I demonstrate the advantages, I demonstrate my benefits. I then move on to a point of trying to create desire, okay, so we want them to desire to take action, okay, so when they get involved in any of these things, I want them to have some sort of bias for action at the end of it, and then actually to take the action, all right, so I want them to then do something. Right, so all of these messages, regardless of which way I go, whether I go mass, I want to try and get them to do something at the end or have a desire to do it, even if it's below the line, okay, maybe make the sale straight away, through the line, click the red button, get more information, come to our store, or public relations, they want to get involved, want to report and want to participate. Okay, so that's really what I'm trying to do. And as I take them from each one of these steps to the next step and escalate it, so the first one I get their attention, second one I get their interest, then I get the desire for action, and then I get the action itself. As we go with each one, we're always going to have a bit of a drop-off. So if we get 100 people here, we might only get 10 there. We can track that over time. We want to keep improving the rate to get more interest and more attraction, more people going, and then develop better outputs. Okay, so AIDA is what we're going to talk about in trying to develop that out. And there are a couple of basic concepts for you now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit further on these media vehicles and really understand what's going on. Okay, so in the current market environment, in the marketing environment rather, there's a lot of choices for advertisers these days, okay? And what this really comes down to is making sure that you're making the right choices or right combination of choices for your audience, okay? Because what we need to really understand is who is the audience, where are they going to be? Remember, right message, right time, right place, right audience, etc. We want to really get in front of them, and we need to think about, well, where are they now? And really, digital media or digital advertising options are certainly one of the large portion of most businesses' media mix. Okay, everyone's pretty much moved towards that it is digital advertising. And the media consumption patterns, the way people absorb the information pretty much matches that. Okay, people are moving more and more towards online and digital content for how they actually get their messages through to them. So as advertisers or as marketers, we need to be aware of that and obviously move to it. And that's pretty much where the industry's gone, obviously. All right, so when we start to talk about this, we start to break it down into media classes. Okay, so we've got a media class, and then we talk about a media vehicle. Okay, so this is just a little bit of definition time once again. When we talk about media classes, we're talking about the big picture. All right, so the broad category itself, and that's when we start to talk about television, or we talk about radio, or we talk about outdoor, or we talk about digital, or we talk about print media. Those sort of big, broad terms. Okay, and media classes, big picture. Okay, we're going to have a television ad. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. When we start talking about media vehicle though, that's when we start to get a bit more specific and detailed. So the media class is TV, but the media vehicle, we start to break it down to, are we talking about social media? Are we talking about, because that's a little bit different to the internet. We can talk about digital, but social media is one platform. Things like having websites, etc., are a different one. And then we can even break it down further as to which social media. But in this case, are we talking about industry magazines? Are we talking about TV channels in particular? So when we say we're going to have a TV ad, yep, great. What channel? Okay, and we're starting to define those things down. So what channel? What radio station are you talking about? Are you getting specific down to, if we're talking about, we're going to go to print media as our media class. Our media vehicle is suburban newspapers. We break that down to the Sydney Morning Herald in Sydney, okay? So we actually get really, really fine detail. So this is that, and this becomes the detail picture. So that's what we're talking about with the vehicle. Big picture, the class of where we're going, as opposed to the vehicle, which is the specifics of how we're going to use that or where exactly we're going to be on the ground. So when we're starting to select the right media vehicles, there's a few questions that we need to start asking ourselves and a few things we need to cover off. And the first one is, does my customer use this media? All right, a lot of people, I see it all the time. People come up with a bit of a marketing campaign, or they come up with a bit of a marketing thing, and they go, "Oh, we're just going to get onto the radio and we're going to advertise to these people." And you're just sort of thinking, "Well, hang on, I think I know your target market. Are they really going to be sitting there listening to the radio?" If they listen to the radio on their way to work and their way home from work, there's really little point in your radio ad being played all day. You might be missing a bit of a trick here and spending money you don't need to spend on dead space. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Make sure you've done your research. If they're not looking in that place, you could be spending money and wasting it, so don't do that. So make sure they're actually using that media vehicle. Do they use it? All right? Don't give newspapers to people who don't read newspapers. It's a waste of time. All right, is it suited to the creative requirements of the advertising message? Okay, so, once again, we talked about, if you've got a lot of print or a lot of heavy detailed information, that's really not going to work for a radio ad. Probably is not necessarily going to work for a TV station unless you're doing one of those 30-minute infomercials or something, in which case you're going to pay for that. Have, up to you, but have a big think. Is it actually going to hit what we want it to do? If we're relying on very heavy visuals, having it on the radio, probably not going to work. So think about that. Does it meet the reach and frequency requirements? In other words, can I get out there to enough people with this message? And can I do it frequently enough for it to be worthwhile? If I've got a high speed activity that we need to punch the information out in a very, very quick basis over a short duration, high intensity, putting it in a weekly newspaper probably isn't going to be the way to go for us. All right, we're going to need something to get in front of those people almost on a daily basis, and a once a month or once a week publication might not cut it. All right, so we might have a great publication, but if they're not going to see it until weeks from now, it starts to take some of the heat out of what we're trying to do and might not be beneficial. The next thing is it actually cost effective? All right, and that's when we started talking about looking at your CPM, okay, understanding whether it's cost effective and understanding whether it reaches the requirements of your budget. Okay, are we spending the right amount of money on this? Are we pouring all of our advertising eggs into one basket to try and get that yield? Or are we trying to actually mix this up a little bit? We've got to think about how that's going to get costed. And the other thing I look at is how can I track or assess the performance? All right, so how do I know whether it's going to work? If I put the advertising out there, what's my mechanism for making sure that that had an effect? How do I know that it's working? Putting a message out there is not the same as receiving feedback or receiving some sort of action. So what I need to be able to do is track straight away. We did this, and then this happened. We did this, then the sales increased. We did this, then more people came to our website. Okay, was there a noticeable effect, and how are we going to measure that? And then obviously we start to look at, when we're thinking about choosing our media vehicle, well, how has that vehicle performed in the past? All right, do we have any statistics on, we did that last time, we ran an ad, and this is what happened, and that was great? Or are we going a little bit blind, and we're not entirely sure how or what that's going to do? In other words, we don't want to start putting our money into something if we don't know what's going to happen afterwards. That's a bit speculative, can be a bit risky, and we risk spending money that we don't get back. Now that's fine if that's happy with your risk profile, but think about it carefully. Obviously what we're trying to do is maximize our bang for buck, and that means we want to try and use things that have been tested and proven to work so that we can keep replicating a result. Okay, we don't want to necessarily go out there and forge ahead unless we really, really want to forge ahead and we've got a risk profile that says that. Over to you in that regard. Have a bit of a think about how you want to go on that. Okay, so when we're starting to choose those media vehicles, then we've talked a lot about, further considerations about how we're going to select them and our conversations about how to select them, we need to make sure that we've got the right audience composition fit. Okay, so we're talking about audience composition, okay, and we need to make sure that we're fitting in with that. And what that really entails is we need to start thinking about, well, what are the media consumption habits and patterns of my target market? So, who are they, first of all? We've got that information, but then start to think about, how we're going to get a clear picture of what they're doing and what they're engaging with, okay? Now, this is a rapidly changing area, so information that was valid a couple of years ago will not necessarily translate to today. There's new things popping up all the time. So what we need to do is make sure that we've got the most recent information we can about our target market and how they consume that media. Okay, there's a bunch of different places I can look. We can start to look up Comscore. Okay, so we can start to look at things like Comscore. We can get into Nielsen. Okay, Nielsen Publications, a whole lot of information and data that they put out that tells us about who's doing what, where, when, and how. Okay, we can start to think about, there are various industry reports. Okay, there's quite a whole lot of information out there that we can start to dig through, and that's what we're starting to do. At this point, before we start going off and doing a lot and spending a lot of money, we do need to make sure we do our research, okay? Time spent doing research is very rarely wasted. You usually find there's something out there that you didn't know. Either that, or at the very, very worst, all it does is confirm for you that what you know is correct, okay? So before you spend money and start to worry about the money you're spending, check it out. There are audience surveys, there's a whole lot of online reports, there's a whole lot of different stuff out there. We just need to start finding a reasonable source of information, start pulling it in. Universities also produce papers and research, there's all those sort of things out there, there's industry white papers. There's quite a lot of places to get that information, and certainly take the time to look at it, all right? Make sure your information is as up to date as possible, as I say, particularly as things are changing at a very rapid pace at the moment. Probably more so now than in the past, definitely. And we need to make sure that we're up to date in it. Okay, so don't rely on something from 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we barely had the internet, let alone the stuff we have right now. So the speed at which it's changing, and as things update, we need to make sure our information is recent and relevant and on point. The next thing is we need to just make sure there's that creative fit. Okay, when we talk about creative fit, make sure once again you're choosing the right media based on your creative requirements. Okay, so your main considerations are, just ask yourself, do I require imagery? Okay, do I require pictures? If I require pictures, it's immediately going to tell us what's going to happen there. Do I need sound? Do I need text / copy? Okay, that's what we often refer to it as, is copy. Okay, so the text, the details you put in there. Okay, is it going to be something that requires video? Okay, so depending on what I'm trying to sell or what I'm trying to promote or what I'm trying to market, those things are really going to come in there, and I really need to get clear on it. Okay, so it's going to affect the cost as well. If it requires video and requires heaps of this sort of stuff, that means it needs to be conveyed in a way that's a moving picture, and that immediately narrows down my vehicle to something like TV or streaming internet ads, those sort of things. If it's just text or copy, it might be something as simple as a brochure or a handout, and I can get away with that. Okay, so thinking about what's going to be the most effective at promoting the image, and then choose appropriately, okay? And when I say choose appropriately, look, there might be a lot of things you want to do, but you might need to ask yourself, is it the most valid? Am I getting carried away? Am I spending too much money when a more simple message would actually achieve the same goal? It's very easy to get caught up and get carried away and want to do all sorts of amazing things with the latest flashing logos and burning images. That's great, but if it wasn't necessary, okay, that's money you might not have necessarily had to spend that way. You could have brought it into another, spend the same money, get people in your shop with something basic, and then give them a demo. You might have ended up spending the same money and yielded a better result that way. Just the next one is just making sure that it has the right reach and frequency, okay, which we've talked about before. Okay, getting to the right people, getting to the right number of people, making sure the selected vehicle is going to reach your target market. Okay, so if I put a billboard, so a big sign somewhere, and everyone can walk past it, is it going to reach my target audience? Okay, if I put a great billboard into the wrong suburb, it might be the wrong consumer. If I go to a really wealthy suburb and put this nice billboard there saying here's the really cheap item, they might not be interested. Same, if I've got some luxury expensive brand and I go to an area where no one has any money, it's a bit of a waste of my time and cash, and all they do is hate me afterwards. So don't do that. All right, and we need to think about, how often is the audience going to be seeing that sign? Okay, so there are some signs that they put, particularly on a railway station. They know that every time you're going along and back and forth, you have to stand on the railway station and see that sign. They know that their target market at that railway station probably catches a train to work, so they see it every morning. Then they catch a train home, so they see it every afternoon as well. So they know that in a week, someone's probably going to see that sign up to 10 times for the average person using that train station, all right? So that's what we're trying to get to there, is how often are they going to see that sign? There's no point spending a lot of money putting a great sign out there if no one ever sees it, or if they're only ever going to see it once because they probably ignore it. It might take a few times of seeing it before the message registers. The other thing is making sure that it fits within your budget. Okay, can't ram that home enough. Make sure you really do all your costings before you begin, because you need to know what you're really up for, okay? There's no point finding out you need to come up with a whole pile of extra cash all of a sudden and you haven't budgeted for that. So make sure you're spending the budget most effectively on the appropriate media vehicle. Okay, what are they really doing? What's the best way to get in front of them? What's the cheapest way to get in front of them and really reinforce the message? Does one item, is there one item that's taking up the most of my budget? Because if that happens, I might not have flexibility to employ something else or change, so I don't want to get tied up all into one thing. I need to make sure, if I am doing that, does it really, I can make glorious, amazing things, but if I can't afford it, waste of time. And start thinking about how I'm going to make a combination of vehicles, okay? Don't put all your eggs in one basket, all right? Cool. No eggs, spread them out. Great. Okay, so the next thing I need to just quickly look at now that we've thought about that is the media vehicle performance, and just have a quick conversation about those. Remember, we're trying to spend the right money at the right time to get to the right audience with the right message, etc. We need to make sure those vehicles actually perform for us, okay? That we're not just falling in love with this really great idea to advertise, but actually it's an underperforming and outmoded, outdated thing, right? Which can be really bad, okay? So what we're doing is we're now moving to a position of making sure that we evaluate the media vehicles based on performance. And the way we have a look at that is really by looking at past performance. Okay, so pull up past data. Now, either you'll have that from your own marketing campaigns, or when you're looking to buy some media space from someone, they can usually tell you how that media space has performed in the past and give you some statistics. All right, so what we want to do is, or what they should be doing, or you, is analysing the past to research what the future options are. All right, we don't just run campaigns and then not look at what happened. We spend a lot of money, we spend a lot of time, we want to see what effect we got out of it, how we can either replicate the good stuff or change the bad stuff. All right, so we need to analyse that past data, absolutely. So if you're buying from an ad space seller, they'll be able to give you a whole lot of past data when you go to them anyway, and they'll talk to you about what their reach was. They'll talk in terms of what frequency they can offer. So we want to know what's their reach. So how many people do they talk to? What's the frequency of that message? A once a month magazine is going to be once a month. Or are they able to put messages out more frequently? If you look at a local area newspaper, they might have the weekly publication there, but they might also have in your neighbourhoods around there a bunch of other publications. So they might be able to put the message out a little bit quicker. As I say, they'll be able to give you that advice. We also start talking about click-through rates. Okay, so click-through. And started to talk about impressions, conversions, etc. So, you'll see that CPI, CPM, cost per impression, and, etc. When we start talking about click-through, what we're talking about there is if you're advertised on, social media, whatever, the person sees your ad and they go, yep, that looks pretty good. They'll click on the ad and it'll take you through maybe to your website. How often does this take place? So if you're looking at Facebook, you'll see those nice little funky ads in the corner. So they click through and they actually go to your website. And you can be charged, you can organise your fees and charges around that. There's a whole lot of information in it. Dig it up if it's relevant to you and make sure you understand how those systems work and know what you're paying for. All right, so make sure you're conducting your research into each one of those media vehicles. Start looking at what's happened in the past, look at how that could be improved. Make sure that it's going to satisfy your requirements. How many people do you need to reach? What's your conversion ratio is going to be? Think about that AIDA going forward. And remember that for each step, it's going to continue to funnel. Okay, so as they go from there to there, you'll lose some, there to there, you'll lose some, there to there, you'll lose some. These guys will be the final people. All right, so think about how that's going to go together for you. And just lastly, think about the legal and ethical fit. Okay, make sure that any vehicles that you've chosen fit in with your sense of ethics and your sense of legality. All right, because what we need to do is we make sure that there's codes of conduct for certain marketing, what you can and cannot say in certain forums. You need to make sure that you're checking that out. And we've talked about some of those references earlier. ACMA, etc., APRA, they'll give you that. So get onto those websites, get onto those details. If in doubt, send them communications, okay? Do your research. Make sure you don't get yourself in a position where you're going to get in trouble. Particularly things like if you're advertising a sale, there are requirements to what a price needs to be before you can say different prices now. If you're saying it's on sale now, it had to be against the price it was previously. You can't sort of mark it up to mark it down and other deceptive things there. Bait and switch advertising, there's quite a lot of stuff that you need to be aware of where you can't sort of be seen to be suckering people in. Really got to do your research and be ethical about it. All right. What that also does is even if it met the requirements for, on a legal basis, it's the old, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And if you're not checking out the ethical boundaries of what you're supposed to do, it can start to lead to brand damage. And if it's actually, a bad choice that's a breach of the law, then it can actually lead to prosecution and fines, right? So there could be money in that. So make sure that you're not getting into a position where you're accidentally, either directly or accidentally getting into a position where you're doing, false advertising, you're not targeting children, inappropriately, that you're not, sending out unsolicited email that people didn't ask for, which is called spam, or getting into racial discrimination or any of those things, right? So you have to be really careful with your message. Check it out, making sure other people have had a look at it. Think about the ethical and legal requirements. Make sure the message is clear, simple to easy to understand, based on past performance, whether it's going to do what you want and the other things that we've selected there. But, really just be careful, check the legislation, check the codes of practice, make sure you adhere to them, just be honest and open with what you're advertising, and you won't come to any sort of grief. Be prepared to go out there and put a clear message in the appropriate channel. All right, so with the legal stuff, check it out, make sure you look it up. As I say, I can't stress that strongly enough. And there's professional organisations out there who are more than happy to help you and give you guidance because they want you to get it right too, because it makes the whole advertising industry look better if everyone's being ethical and honest. All right, great. Be a good advertiser. All right, great stuff.